The crystalline ships of the Vinrathi appeared in Earth's orbit like frozen teardrops against the morning sky. Ambassador Isabella Martinez stood at the panoramic window of the Global Unity Center's 200th floor, her grandmother's ceramic teapot clutched tightly against her chest. The pot's familiar weight offered little comfort as she watched the alien vessels descend through the clouds with mathematical precision. "They're early," Deputy Director Raj Patel noted, checking his quantum tablet. 15 minutes and 27 seconds early, to be exact. He paused, adjusting his formal uniform, just like last time. Isabella nodded, her fingers tracing the worn patterns on the teapot's surface. The Vinrathi were always exact, always precise. In the 6 months since first contact, they had never deviated from their schedules by even a second. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, their social structure built on pure logic and efficiency. They had no art, no music, no cuisine, only function and purpose. The entire diplomatic corps had tried everything in their standard playbook. Formal dinners went untouched. Concert performances were met with clinical analysis of sound wave patterns. Art exhibitions earned only commentary about pigment composition and brush-stroke velocity. But Isabella had a different plan. The landing pad hummed as the Vinrathi shuttle touched down, its pearlescent surface refracting the morning sunlight into rainbow patterns. Isabella straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her. The Vinrathi had proposed a trade, their advanced terraforming technology, in exchange for something they called the essential human element. 6 months of negotiations, and still no one knew exactly what they meant. The shuttle's door dissolved like morning mist, revealing High Counselor Vix and her delegation. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their translucent skin showing the complex network of silvery veins beneath. Their eyes, entirely silver without pupils, reflected the world like perfect mirrors. Ambassador Martinez. Vex's voice resonated with harmonic undertones, a product of their dual vocal cords. "Your temperature has elevated by 1.3 degrees since our last meeting. Are you unwell?" Isabella smiled, though she knew the Vinrathi didn't understand the gesture. "I'm perfectly fine, High Counselor. Just excited about today's meeting." Excitement. Vix tilted her head slightly. An emotional state serving no practical purpose. "We have noted humanity's tendency toward such inefficiencies." "Perhaps," Isabella said, holding her grandmother's teapot a little tighter. "Or perhaps there's more value in our inefficiencies than meets the eye. Would you join me in a harmony chamber? I have something I'd like to share with you." The Harmony Chamber was Isabella's own addition to the Global Unity Center, a space designed to blend Earth's various cultural elements. Traditional cushions from Japan surrounded a low table, while delicate Arabic calligraphy adorned the walls. The scent of Himalayan incense lingered in the air, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled out below like a glittering tapestry. The Vinrathi delegation analyzed everything with their usual clinical precision. "The ceiling height is 3.7 meters, one of them noted. Inefficient use of space." Isabella began unpacking her grandmother's tea set, each piece wrapped carefully in silk cloth that had once been her mother's wedding dress. The pottery was nothing special to look at, worn by time and use, glazed in simple earth tones. But each chip and crack held a story, a memory, a piece of her family's soul. "In my family," she began, heating the water to precisely 88 degrees, one detail she knew would appeal to the Vinrathi. "We believe that tea is more than just a drink. It's a bridge between people, between past and present, between what we know and what we have yet to discover." Vix watched the procedure with typical Vinrathi intensity. "Your species often assigns metaphysical properties to simple chemical processes. It is inefficient." "Is it?" Isabella measured the tea leaves carefully. These weren't ordinary leaves. They were from her grandmother's garden in the mountains of Peru, grown in soil that had nurtured these plants for generations. "Everything we do shapes who we are, High Counselor. Every ritual, every shared moment, every cup of tea." The water swirled over the leaves, releasing an aroma that filled the chamber. For a fraction of a second, so brief Isabella almost missed it, she saw the Vinrathi delegation's silver eyes flicker. This scent, one of the junior delegates spoke, their voice carrying an unfamiliar note. It produces an unusual response in our olfactory processing centers. Isabella smiled again, pouring the tea with the graceful movements her grandmother had taught her. There's an old saying in my family: the first sip of tea is for the eyes, the second for the nose, the third for the memories we haven't made yet. She placed a cup before each delegate, the steam rising in delicate spirals. The Vinrathi stared at the cups, their usual perfect stillness somehow different now. Expectant, perhaps, though Isabella knew they would deny experiencing any such thing. High Counselor Vix lifted her cup, analyzing the liquid with those mirror-like eyes. You believe this beverage contains the essential human element we seek? Isabella shook her head. I believe it contains something far more important, High Counselor. It contains the possibility of understanding what that element might be. As the Vinrathi raised their cups in perfect unison, Isabella held her breath. 6 months of failed negotiations, of clinical observations and logical impasses had led to this moment. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice. Sometimes, mi amor, the shortest distance between 2 points isn't a straight line. It's a cup of tea. The delegates took their first sip, and for the first time since humans had met the Vinrathi, their silver eyes began to show something more than just reflections. The silence in the harmony chamber lasted exactly 37 seconds. Isabella counted them in her racing heartbeat. High Counselor Vix's hand trembled ever so slightly as she lowered her cup, causing tiny ripples in the remaining tea. It was the first imperfect movement Isabella had ever seen from a Vinrathi. This sensation, Vix spoke, her dual-tone voice carrying an unfamiliar tremor. It is unprecedented. Our biological sensors indicate no known compounds that should cause such effects. She turned to her scientific advisor, Delegate Nix. Analyze. Nix was already running a handheld scanner over his cup, the device's crystalline surface pulsing with soft light. Initial analysis shows common organic compounds, polyphenols, amino acids, caffeine. Nothing that explains the neural response we're experiencing. He paused, silver eyes narrowing. There are trace elements our instruments cannot identify. Isabella began preparing a second steeping of the tea, her movements deliberate and practiced. The leaves, dark and curled like tiny secrets, unfurled in the hot water. This tea has been in my family for 15 generations, she explained. The original plants were discovered by my ancestor, Teresa Martins, in a hidden valley high in the Andes Mountains. The delegates watched, transfixed, as she continued the preparation. Their usual rigid posture had softened almost imperceptibly. She found them growing near an ancient monastery. Isabella continued, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality her grandmother had used for storytelling. The monks there had tended these plants for centuries, passing down the cultivation methods through oral tradition only. They believed the tea had the power to awaken what they called the sleeping soul. Superstition, Vix stated, but her voice lacked its usual dismissive tone. Yet, she lifted her empty cup, examining it as if it might contain answers to questions she hadn't known to ask. Isabella smiled softly. Teresa was a botanist. She approached everything with scientific rigor, just as you would, High Counselor. But when she encountered these plants, she discovered something that defied her instruments and analysis. She began pouring the second steeping. The monks taught her their methods, but more importantly, they taught her to understand that some truths can't be measured or quantified. The liquid swirled into the cups, darker this time, releasing an aroma that seemed to dance in the air. The Vinrathi delegation's eyes tracked the movement of the steam, their usual perfect synchronization forgotten, as each followed their own pattern of curiosity. The soil composition. Delegate Nix suddenly spoke. The altitude, the specific cultivation methods. These variables could produce unique chemical compounds, yet our most advanced analysis technology cannot. He stopped, appearing almost frustrated, an emotion the Vinrathi claimed not to possess. "There's more to the story," Isabella said, watching as the delegates instinctively reached for their cups. Teresa learned that the monks performed a ritual with each planting and harvest. They would sit in meditation for 3 days, focusing their thoughts on peace, understanding, and connection. They believed their intentions became part of the tea itself. "Scientifically impossible," Vix declared, even as she inhaled deeply over her cup. Another unprecedented action for a species that claimed to only breathe for biological necessity. "Perhaps," Isabella acknowledged. "But consider this. Your own scientists have proven that observation affects quantum outcomes. Is it so impossible that consciousness, focused with intention over centuries, might leave its mark on something as sensitive as a living plant?" The second sip seemed to affect the Vinrathi even more profoundly than the first. Isabella watched as their translucent skin began to take on subtle hues, the faintest blush of color that their species had never displayed before. Junior Delegate 6, the youngest of the group, spoke for the first time. "I am experiencing images, memories that are not my own." Their voice carried a note of wonder. "I see faces, moments, emotions I have never." "The genetic memory centers," Nix interrupted, his scanner whirring. "They're activating. Portions of our neural structure that have been dormant for millennia are showing increased activity." High Counselor Vix set down her cup with careful precision, but her hands weren't quite steady. "Ambassador Martinez, you knew this would happen. It wasn't a question." Isabella touched her grandmother's teapot gently. "I hoped. The tea affects everyone differently, but it always seems to find what they need most. For some, it brings peace. For others, clarity. For you," she met Vix's silver eyes, "perhaps it's awakening something your species forgot it had." The Vinrathi delegates sat in unusual stillness, not their normal calculated stillness, but the quiet of deep contemplation. Outside the Harmony Chamber's windows, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the city below. Time seemed to move differently here, in this space between what was and what could be. "The third steeping," Vix said suddenly. "You mentioned it was for memories not yet made." Her voice carried an undertone that hadn't been there before, something almost like longing. Isabella began the preparation once more, this time adding a single dried jasmine blossom to the brew. The flower floated on the surface, gradually unfurling like a new dawn. "My grandmother used to say that tea ceremonies are like bridges," she said softly. "Each cup we share builds another span, connecting not just person to person, but past to future, known to unknown." She looked at the delegates, seeing the subtle changes in their bearing, their expressions, their very presence. "Perhaps this is the bridge our peoples have been seeking." As she poured the third steeping, the jasmine blossom swirling in the golden liquid, the air in the Harmony Chamber seemed to thicken with possibility. The Vinrathi reached for their cups not in unison, but as individuals, each moving to their own newly awakened rhythm. And in the steam that rose from their cups, the future began to take a new shape. The third steeping brought something unexpected. As the Vinrathi delegation sipped their tea, the silvery networks beneath their translucent skin began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, like starlight caught in crystal. High Counselor Vix was the first to speak, but her voice had changed, carrying harmonics that seemed to echo from ancient depths. "I remember," she whispered, the double tones of her voice creating a melody that made the air itself vibrate. "Before the great optimization, when our people still..." She stopped, pressing one long-fingered hand against her chest. "When we still danced." Isabella leaned forward slightly, her heart racing. The Great Optimization was a mysterious period in Vinrathi history that their delegation had never discussed. Their historical records began after it, as if nothing before had mattered. "We were different then," Junior Delegate Zix added, their skin rippling with waves of iridescent color. Our cities weren't just functional. They were beautiful. We had gardens that served no purpose except to. They struggled with the concept. To make us feel. Delegate Nix's scanner clattered to the table. Forgotten. His hands trembled as he lifted them before his face, watching the play of light beneath his skin. The genetic memories. They're not just activating. They're integrating. Generations of experience, of emotion, of... He looked at Isabella with eyes that now swirled with colors like nebulae. Of life. The harmony chamber seemed to pulse with energy as each Vinrathi experienced their awakening. Isabella sat quietly, continuing to prepare and serve the tea, creating a steady rhythm that anchored the moment. Her grandmother had taught her that sometimes the most important part of serving tea was knowing when to be still, when to let the tea itself do the work. The essential human element, Vix said suddenly, rising from her cushion in a fluid motion that bore no resemblance to her former mechanical precision. We thought it was something we could isolate, study, replicate. But it's not a component at all, is it, Ambassador Martinez? It's this capacity to bridge the rational and the emotional, the measured and the felt. Isabella nodded slowly. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our logic. It's our ability to hold contradictions, to be both scientific and spiritual, rational and emotional. The tea ceremony embodies this. Precise measurements and temperatures, yes, but also intention, tradition, and connection. The other delegates had risen too, moving around the chamber with newfound grace. Their usual synchronized movements had given way to individual expressions of discovery. One traced the Arabic calligraphy on the walls with wondering fingers. Another stood at the windows, swaying slightly as if feeling the rhythm of the city below. Before the great optimization, Vix continued, her voice carrying both pain and wonder. Our society was much like yours. We had art, music, dance. We celebrated the inefficient because we understood that not everything of value could be measured. She turned to Isabella, her eyes now swirling with deep blues and purples. But we were afraid. Afraid of what? Isabella asked softly, though she suspected she knew the answer. Of our own potential for chaos, of the messiness of emotion, of the unpredictability of life itself. Vix's voice resonated with ancestral memory. The great optimization was meant to be temporary, a way to survive a period of crisis. We would lock away our emotions, our creativity, our individual expressions until it was safe to reclaim them. But you forgot, Isabella whispered. You forgot there was anything to reclaim. Nix moved to stand beside his leader, his scientific detachment replaced by intense curiosity. The tea. It's not just activating dormant neural pathways. It's reminding us of who we were, who we could be again. The sunlight through the windows had taken on the golden hues of late afternoon, casting warm shadows across the chamber. Isabella began preparing a fourth steeping, something her grandmother had only done on rare, profound occasions. Into the pot, she placed a single drop of essence from a night-blooming jasmine, said to bloom only when the moon was full and the stars were perfectly aligned. In my family, she said as she worked, we believe that every cup of tea contains a story. Sometimes it's a simple story of moments peace in a busy day. Sometimes it's a story of connection between friends. She looked up at the transformed beings before her, and sometimes it's a story of remembering who you truly are. The Vinrathi watched the preparation with eyes that now held entire galaxies of emotion. Their skin rippled with colors that seemed to respond to their feelings. Deep blues of contemplation, flashes of silver wonder, warm golds of awakening joy. We came seeking an element, Vix said softly, but we found instead a mirror that shows us not just who we are, but who we were, who we could be. She paused, and for the first time in recorded history, a Vinrathi smiled. The question now is, what do we do with this awakening? As Isabella poured the fourth steeping, the tea seemed to glow with an inner light, reflecting the newfound radiance of the Vinrathi themselves. The bridge between species had become a gateway to transformation, and the story was far from over. "We begin," Isabella replied, her grandmother's wisdom flowing through her words, "by sharing another cup of tea." The news of what happened in the Harmony Chamber spread through the Vinrathi fleet like waves through quantum space. As the fourth steeping of tea worked its subtle magic, urgent communications flashed between the crystalline ships above. The Vinrathi Council of Logic, monitoring from their homeworld, demanded explanations for the unprecedented neural patterns they were detecting from their delegation. "They're afraid," Vix announced, studying a holographic message that shimmered before her, her skin now rippled with deep crimson, a color of concern. "The Council cannot comprehend what's happening to us. They see only danger in this change." Isabella watched as the other delegates gathered around their leader, their movements now fluid and natural, no longer bound by rigid protocols. The transformation was extraordinary. In mere hours, they had begun to reclaim millennia of lost heritage. "The Council has ordered us to return immediately," Delegate Nix reported, his voice carrying new depths of emotion. "They're concerned about contamination." The word carried a weight of irony that would have been impossible for him just hours before. Junior Delegate Zix stepped forward, their skin shimmering with determination. "They need to understand. They need to experience this themselves." They turned to Isabella, eyes swirling with purpose. "The tea, could we bring it to our people?" Isabella touched her grandmother's teapot thoughtfully. "The tea itself isn't magic. It's a key that unlocks what's already there. But yes, I believe sharing it could help others remember too." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "However, such an awakening should be a choice, not an imposition." High Counselor Vix's expression shifted through complex emotions: concern, hope, resolve. "Our people deserve the choice we were never given during the Great Optimization. But the Council will resist," Nix finished. "They believe they're protecting our species from chaos, just as our ancestors did." Isabella began preparing a fifth steeping, something that hadn't been done in her family since the night her grandmother had passed on the tea's guardianship to her. Into the water, she added 3 drops of morning dew collected from the original tea plants in Peru, preserved through a process known only to her family. "In times of great change," she said, her movements deliberate and focused, "my grandmother would say that tea becomes more than a drink. It becomes a witness to history, a catalyst for truth." The water began to shimmer with an almost otherworldly glow. "This steeping is rare. In my family, it's called the courage to change." As she poured, the liquid seemed to capture and amplify the late afternoon light, creating patterns that danced across the delegate's luminescent skin. Each cup held what looked like a universe in miniature, stars and nebulae swirling in the golden liquid. Vix lifted her cup, studying the mysterious patterns. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we need to show rather than tell." Her dual-toned voice resonated with newfound authority. "I propose a gathering, not just the Council, but representatives from all our major colonies. Here, in this chamber." "A tea ceremony," Isabella nodded, understanding immediately. "A bridge not just between our species, but between who your people were and who they could become." "It would be unprecedented," Nix mused, his scientific mind now working in harmony with his awakened emotions. "The Council has never left our homeworld. The colonial representatives never gather in person." "Exactly." Vix's skin pulsed with bright determination. "We break the patterns of isolation that have kept us bound to old ways. We create a new pattern, beginning here, with this." She raised her cup slightly, with courage. As the delegates drank the fifth steeping, the change in them seemed to stabilize, to root itself deeply in their being. The chaotic swirl of rediscovered emotions settled into a steady glow, like stars finding their place in a new constellation. Isabella activated the room's communication panel, connecting to Director Patel's office. "Raj," she said, "I need you to prepare for something big. We're about to host the largest Vinrathi gathering in their recorded history. There was a moment of stunned silence before Raj's voice came through, carrying both excitement and anxiety. How many? Isabella looked to Vix, who answered with newfound warmth in her harmonic voice. 347 representatives. The entire leadership structure of our species. She paused, then added with the ghost of a smile. We may need more cups. As the sun began to set outside the Harmony Chamber's windows, casting the room in deep golds and purples, Isabella began writing down the precise instructions for preparing large quantities of the sacred tea. The paper was handmade, another family tradition, and her grandmother's voice seemed to guide her hand as she wrote. There will be resistance, she said, looking up at the transformed beings before her. Change this profound always faces opposition. Yes, Vex agreed, her skin now glowing with a steady, determined light. But we have something our ancestors lacked when they chose the path of pure logic. She gestured to the tea ceremony laid out before them. We have a bridge between what was lost and what can be. We have a way to remember not just with our minds, but with our hearts. The delegates gathered around the low table once more, their presence now carrying both the precision of their optimized selves and the warmth of their awakened heritage. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, like distant echoes of the light that now lived within the Vinrathi. Isabella began preparing for what would become the most important tea ceremony in human and Vinrathi history, knowing that this was just the beginning of a transformation that would ripple across the stars. 3 days later, the Harmony Chamber had been transformed. The space, usually intimate and serene, now expanded through temporary quantum fields to accommodate hundreds of Vinrathi representatives. Traditional cushions spiraled outward in concentric circles, each handwoven with patterns that seemed to move in the shifting light. The air was thick with anticipation and the subtle fragrance of brewing tea. Isabella stood at the center, surrounded by 7 tea stations, each an exact replica of her grandmother's set. The original teapot held court at her own station, its worn surface now seeming to pulse with an inner light. High Counselor Vix and her original delegation, their skin now permanently imbued with shifting colors of emotion, had spent the previous day helping prepare their fellow representatives for what was to come. The Council of Logic arrives, Delegate Nix announced, his voice carrying both tension and hope. Through the chamber's massive windows, a new crystalline ship descended, larger and more elaborate than any before it. Its surface caught the morning sun, sending rainbow fractals dancing across the assembled crowd. The council members entered like living statues, their skin pure translucent white, unmarked by the colors of emotion that now painted their transformed delegates. Their silver eyes swept the room with clinical precision, cataloging every deviation from standard protocol. This gathering violates 47 established procedures. First, Logic Counselor Rix announced, their harmonics sharp with disapproval. High Counselor Vix, you have exceeded your authority and potentially compromised our entire species with this emotional contamination. Vix stepped forward, her skin rippling with calm determination. Honored counselors, we have not been contaminated. We have been awakened. She gestured to the assembled representatives, each showing varying degrees of transformation from their contact with the original delegation. We have remembered who we were before the great optimization, who we can be again. The optimization was necessary, another counselor declared. It saved our species from the chaos of emotion, the inefficiency of individuality. Isabella began the ritual of heating water, the subtle sounds drawing every eye in the chamber. The council members watched with rigid disapproval as she measured the sacred leaves into each pot with practiced precision. Necessity, she spoke softly, but her voice carried to every corner of the expanded space, can become habit. And habit, given enough time, can become chains. She looked up at the council, meeting their silver eyes without fear. Your ancestors chose logic as a temporary shelter from chaos. But shelters are meant to protect, not to imprison. The water began to steam, releasing the first hints of the tea's transformative aroma. Several council members shifted unconsciously, their perfect stillness disturbed by ancient memories stirring deep within their genetic code. "We propose a choice," Vix announced, moving to stand beside Isabella. "Not an imposition, not a mandate, but the very thing our species has always claimed to value most: an informed decision." Her skin glowed with all the colors of a sunrise as she faced her leaders. "Experience what we have experienced. Remember what we have remembered. Then decide." The chamber fell into profound silence as Isabella began pouring the first steeping. The liquid caught the morning light, seeming to hold galaxies in each cup. Junior delegates moved with newfound grace, delivering cups to each member of the council. First Logic Counselor Rix held their cup with rigid precision, analyzing the liquid with cold intensity. "This is highly irregular. The potential for psychological disruption is precisely the point," Vex interrupted gently. "We have lived in the cage of pure logic for millennia. Perhaps it's time to remember that the most profound discoveries often come from embracing the irregular." Isabella watched as the council members, bound by their own protocols of diplomatic courtesy, lifted their cups in unison. The moment the tea touched their lips, the transformation began. Colors bloomed beneath their translucent skin like aurora borealis, spreading in waves of light and emotion. Rix's cup clattered against its saucer, their hands trembling. "I remember," they whispered, their harmonic voice cracking with emotion for the first time in centuries. The songs, the dances, the joy of discovery not just for function, but for, they struggled with the long-forgotten concept, for beauty. The change rippled through the council like a wave of light, each member experiencing their own awakening. Some wept with remembered joy, others laughed with the pure delight of rediscovery. The rigid patterns of their society began to shift and reform, like a chrysalis giving way to new life. As Isabella prepared the second steeping, she saw the future unfolding before her. The Vinrathi would not abandon logic. It was too deeply part of who they were, but they would weave it together with emotion, creativity, and individual expression, creating something entirely new. A civilization that could bridge the gap between efficiency and beauty, between function and feeling. "The essential human element," Vix said softly, watching her people transform. "We thought it was something we could study and replicate, but it was something we needed to remember within ourselves." Isabella nodded, adding a drop of morning dew to each pot. "Sometimes the longest journey is the one that leads us back to ourselves." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its light across the changed gathering, Isabella thought of her grandmother and all the generations before her who had guarded this tea and its wisdom. They had known, somehow, that these leaves held not just flavor and warmth, but the power to bridge worlds, between people, between species, and between who we are and who we might become. The Vinrathi ships above the city seemed to shimmer with new light, their crystalline surfaces reflecting not just sunlight now, but the awakened emotions of their crews. And in a harmony chamber, over cup after cup of transformative tea, two species began writing a new chapter in the story of the universe, together. "To new beginnings," Isabella said, raising her cup. "To remembering," Vix added, her skin glowing with all the colors of hope. And across the chamber, hundreds of voices joined in harmony, creating a song that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for millennia. The sound of logic and emotion, efficiency and beauty, past and future, finally finding their balance in a simple cup of tea. The end.